The Shadowy Killer, a short crime story by Vahid Sajidifar. In the small, quiet town of Greyview, daily life seemed peaceful. But at night, when silence and darkness enveloped everything, real fear and terror roamed the narrow, old streets of Greyview. For a long time, the townspeople had been talking about mysterious disappearances. No one knew how or why some of the town's residents vanished in such strange and inexplicable ways. Fear and dread of a serial killer, whom they called the Phantom, had taken root in their hearts. At night, the Phantom moved silently through the alleys and streets like a ghost. No one had seen him, and only terrifying tales of the vanished victims remained. The police investigations led nowhere, with only faint footprints and ambiguous signs hinting at the killer's presence. One night, a young and curious girl, Lucy, decided to uncover the mystery behind these disappearances. Armed with a small camera and a flashlight, she set out in the dark streets of Greyview, seeking clues. Despite her fear and anxiety, her determination to find the truth pushed her forward. As she walked through a narrow, dark alley, she suddenly heard a faint, eerie sound. Moving toward the noise, she saw a figure disappearing into the shadows, and her heart began to race. She followed the figure, trying to keep a safe distance, while observing his movements. The figure arrived at an abandoned, creepy house and entered. Lucy cautiously followed and hid in a corner of the dark, cold room. She readied her camera and held her breath. At that moment, the figure turned toward her, and his evil, glowing eyes shone in the darkness. Moment when the figure turned toward her, felt her heart pound in her chest. The man's glowing, malevolent eyes shone like red beacons in the darkness. She held her breath, trying to silence the loud beating of her heart. The man moved slowly and heavily toward Lucy. He stopped in front of her, his heavy breathing filling the room. Lucy couldn't move, as if frozen in place. Suddenly, the man leaned in close to her terrified face. A strange smell emanated from his mouth, like wet earth and fresh blood. In a low, chilling voice, he said, "You shouldn't be here." Before Lucy could react, the man reached out to grab her. In that instant, she mustered all her strength and struck the man in the face with her camera, then tried to flee. She bolted out of the room and down the rotting wooden stairs. The stairs creaked under her weight, and the sound of the man's footsteps, following closely behind, filled the air. Lucy reached the front door, but it was locked. Frantic and desperate, she looked around and spotted a small hatch at the bottom of the wall. She hurried to the hatch, squeezed through it, and escaped the abandoned house. Gasping for breath, she ran through the town streets. In the dark, empty streets of Greyview, Lucy searched for help. The town seemed to be in a deep slumber, with no one in sight. She headed to the police station and, between gasps, recounted her horrifying experience. The police quickly went to the abandoned house, but found no trace of the killer or his victims. Only faint footprints and signs of a brief struggle remained. Lucy was convinced the killer was still in town and would strike again soon. Determined to uncover the truth, she decided to continue her investigation with the help of her friends and modern tools. At night, Lucy and her friends roamed the streets and abandoned houses of Greyview, filled with fear and dread of the killer lurking in the darkness. But this time, they were not alone. The killer was aware of their plans and had prepared for confrontation. On one dark, cold night, as Lucy and her friends searched for clues in an abandoned house, they suddenly heard the killer's footsteps. He was slowly approaching them, intent on killing and eliminating all witnesses. Lucy and her friends were trapped in the abandoned house. The killer's footsteps grew closer and more menacing. Lucy, her voice trembling, said, "We need to find a way out, quick." They began searching frantically, but the rooms were dark and filled with old, decaying furniture. Suddenly, one of Lucy's friends, Tom, shouted excitedly, "There's a hidden door here." They all rushed to Tom. The hidden door was in the floor and seemed to lead to a dark basement. They opened the door, and one by one descended into the basement, just as the killer approached the room. In the basement, the air was cold and damp, and the sound of dripping water echoed, adding to the eerie atmosphere. Lucy turned on her flashlight, casting a faint light around them. The basement was filled with old boxes and rusty tools. Desperately, Lucy searched for an exit. The killer reached the top of the basement stairs. His heavy footsteps on the stairs sent shivers down their spines. Lucy and her friends held their breath, hiding in a corner. The killer entered the basement and began searching. Tom, who was close to Lucy, whispered, "We can't stay here. We need to find a way out." Lucy nodded and looked around more carefully. Suddenly, she spotted a light coming from a far corner of the basement. She moved toward the light and found a small door in the back wall. Carefully, they opened the door and entered a narrow, dark tunnel. The killer continued searching the basement, with the faint cries of his previous victims echoing. Lucy and her friends, filled with fear and dread, moved through the tunnel, hoping it would lead them to safety. The tunnel ended at another exit. They opened the door and found themselves in a dark, deserted forest. The fresh forest air gave them a renewed sense of hope. But the killer, having followed their trail, appeared behind them. Lucy shouted to her friends, "We have to keep running." They sprinted into the forest, the killer chasing them with all his might. Gasping for breath, Lucy told Tom, "We need a plan. We can't just keep running." Tom looked around and suddenly noticed an old pit trap nearby. He signaled to Lucy and the others, saying, "This way, we have to lure him into the pit." Lucy and her friends moved toward the pit, coordinating their efforts. At the last moment, just as the killer closed in on them, they darted to the side. Unable to stop his momentum, the killer fell into the pit, his horrifying scream echoing through the forest. They quickly informed the police, who captured the killer with their help. The town of Greyview was finally freed from fear and terror, and Lucy and her friends were hailed as local heroes.
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.